Hi everybody, hope this video finds you all well. Today I am going to replace a cartridge on a turntable, and I thought I'd do a video of the process. I've done a couple of these already, and I'm going to get into a little more detail, and we'll look at some of the Stylus tips out there, some microscope photos that I've taken, and we'll go through the process of installing a cartridge and setting it up. Now, what we're going to be working on today is a phonograph from 1978. It is a Rotel model RP-2500. It's not a really high-end turntable. It wasn't back then, and it's not now either. But it is kind of a good entry-level turntable and a good example of, a basic turntable setup. I remember when my brother-in-law purchased this particular turntable brand new in 1978, and it served him well over the years, and eventually found its way into his and my sister's basement and has been sitting there for many years. And I took it out and just did some basic maintenance on it because it actually was pretty well cared for. And we're going to see in a minute here why we're going to replace the cartridge. So if that sounds interesting to you, stay tuned. That's what we'll be doing. And one other question I'll pose to all of you is, if you like this, I will be happy to do a series on turntables. There's a lot of information out there, and I know from my kids and from people I'm talking about, what I'm reading out there, that there has kind of been a resurgence and a new interest in vinyl and in records and record players and all that. They're starting to release more music on vinyl. It's not being recorded the same way as it was because, of course, not to burst everybody's bubble, but most of the newly pressed vinyl that's out there is coming from digital recordings. So it's an analog recording of a digital recording. We'll talk more about that in maybe another video if we decide to move forward with it. But if that all sounds good to you, stay tuned. That's what we're going to be doing. All right, here is our Rotel model RP-2500. And you can see it's in really good condition for being, over 40 years old. It didn't look it was dirty. It had a lot of dust on it, but it just needed cleaned up. That's all. Everything else was good on it. It was purchased on November 24th, 1978. So it's been around, and I even know the store where it was purchased from, and that place unfortunately is no longer in business, much like the place I worked at and many of the other audio places out there. So first off, why are we replacing the cartridge? Well, the Shure company, who is the one that made this Model 25 cartridge, Shure is still in business making microphones and things like that, but they got out of the cartridge making business. So much so that my Shure cartridge that is on my turntable upstairs on my Pioneer PLX 1000, I purchased it brand new in the box when they were still being produced for $99, and it came with with everything, the mounting screws, and in a real nice case with a little brush and everything. That new old stock cartridge is now selling for $500 to $700 online. And the Stylus, the elliptical Stylus for those replacements, are anywhere from $200 to $300. Just ridiculous for what it is. It's a great cartridge, but certainly if I were going to spend that kind of money, I would never buy that one. There's other ones for that money that would be much better. Anyway, I digress. What we're going to install is a Audio-Technica VM95EN, and the EN stands for Elliptical Nude Stylus. And as I said before, the stylus on this one, well, I'll show you an image up on the screen. Let me pop it up there. And if you notice, there's a pretty I don't think you need to be a professional on turntables or cartridges or stylus or anything like that to see why we need to replace this. Probably replacing this stylus, finding a new old stock one that'll fit, would be expensive. You don't know what you're getting. You don't know if it's aftermarket, what kind of condition it will be. I just opted to, you know, for what is this, $100 maybe at the most. And this same cartridge is used in a whole bunch of different models from this, and the only difference is the stylus. So this is kind of one step above the base model. The base model would be a conical stylus. This one is elliptical nude. They also make a microline, and they also make a shibata. They make a couple different cuts of stylus diamonds. This one's a good one. It will track well. It'll sound good. So that's why we're going to use it, and it doesn't break the bank. Now, looking at this, I will also show you a couple images of what the stylus on this looks like, this elliptical nude, and then I'll also show you a couple images of what a microline stylus looks like, because I do have one of those I can show you. And we'll look at them under the microscope. I'll put them up on the screen right now while we're talking, and you can kind of see the difference in what they are. And really the main idea is you take that cone or funnel shaped stylus. So you have, for instance, see how this is coned and then it kind of rounds off at the end. This would be called a conical tip stylus. And if you shave the front and back off and kind of make it oval so it's a little more elliptical, how about that? You have what's called an elliptical stylus, and when it tracks in the groove, since it's narrower this way, it fits inside those little waves back and forth, so it tracks that groove a little bit better with the higher frequencies. And then as you get more exotic designs like the shibata and the microline and so forth, you'll see that they get thinner and more narrowed, and even those corners where they reach into the groove will get more exotic shape. Some of them have to be laser cut because they're so complex of a shape. But the idea is to fit all the way down in the groove and be able to track those tiny little variances that make the high frequency sounds and so forth. That's what it's all about. And that's why the higher end you go with a stylus, a cut of stylus, the more expensive they get because they're more difficult to manufacture. So this one would be considered an entry-level good stylus, and that's why we're going to use it. Okay, now all of the maintenance has been done on this turntable as far as oiling the spindle, replacing the belt, cleaning the potentiometers, for the trim adjustments for the speed, all those little things. It's already been done, and I've shown that in a couple other videos that I did. If you're interested in knowing more about that sort of thing and you want to see me put it together as a series, as I said in the beginning of this video, just let me know, and maybe I'll post a series of videos about turntables. Alright, let's get started on this. First thing we're going to do is just remove the head shell. And you can see how this is just completely butted up against the front. And we're going to talk a little bit about different methods of setting up, but I'm not going to get in super big detail on this video. If you want to know about the different setup types and all that and how they work, let me know again. We'll do that. So the first thing I want to do is just remove these wires and get the cartridge, the old cartridge, off. Okay, we just need a couple of tools here. We're going to use some tweezers. These wires seem to be okay still. Not bad for 40 years. And by the way, this is the original, I'm pretty sure this is not only the original cartridge, but the original stylus that came with this 40 some years ago when it was purchased. So it's pretty amazing. And I think it died and it was never repaired or replaced by my brother-in-law, because after a while people got out of vinyl, CDs and things caught on and people really got into that, and the old records just kind of went by the wayside. And now all of a sudden we have that nostalgia, and the younger people have that, the mystery of how this all works, and it does have a unique sound. And we are not going to talk about that because people all have so many opinions on vinyl versus digital and all that, the analog and digital. So there's our old cartridge, and I'll hang on to this because one day we may be able to find an original new old stock stylus that might that we can use on this for a reasonable price. I'm not paying hundreds of dollars or whatever just because it's old, so we'll keep it as a spare. But of course the stylus is completely shot. In addition, these screws are not going to be needed for this, so I'll put these in with my cartridge hardware. I actually have a little bin that I keep cartridge hardware in because this stuff, you never know when you need it. And this came with its own screwdriver. Comes with a little set of screws, and these are the proper ones to mount the cartridge. And you can see this one, you had to have, you know, a nut on one side and the screw on the other side, whereas this one has threaded inserts, which makes it a lot easier to install. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to install this first, and then we're going to see about connecting the wires. This might, yeah, okay. And we just need the short one, and then we have these little washers. We'll put those on. Okay, I got them started. And I'm not going to tighten them. I'm just going to kind of get it till it's seated, because we're going to have to move this, you're going to see. And this turntable is actually very easy to set up, at least to do a basic setup, because it has its own little built-in alignment gauge. Not quite as good as the Pioneer and Techniques that have the thing that slides over the cartridge, but it still has a fairly decent setup. Okay, now when we look at the rear of the cartridge, if we're facing this way down here, and I don't know if I can get some light on the subject here, let's see what we can do. So if we look down here, so the right is going to be this one on here, and the left is going to be this one here. So if you flip it over, you can see this will be right and left, and the positive and negative, positive is going to be towards the top of the head shell, negative is going to be the bottom. So you have right, positive, and negative, left, positive, and negative. And to put these on, the red is the right positive wire. There is a color code to these. They all pretty much follow this same color code. So we're going to take the red wire, and we're going to use our little tweezers. We're going to push it right on there, just like so. Okay. And then the right negative is going to be the green wire. So this is going to be right negative. Just like so. And then the left positive is going to be the white, which is this one right here. And then the blue is going to be the left negative. And again, you can get fancier leads, and you know, they have Teflon on them and all kinds of crazy things, and you can get them straighter, so there's no quote-unquote crosstalk over, although I don't really subscribe to a lot of that. But anyway, it's as simple as that. And you want to either leave the cover, the stylus cover on, or just remove the stylus altogether while you're doing this. Okay, so now that it's mounted, this cartridge again and this head shell is going to be very easy to align, because you don't have to you know, hold the nut with one side, and you know, you just loosen these a little bit and this will slide around and tighten it. The other thing is, when we get into this, you're going to find out that when you adjust the alignment on this, this is an S-shaped tone arm. So you see this on a lot of turntables out there, like the Technics, or Technics, however you want to pronounce it, or the Pioneer. You know, they all have that S-shaped tone arm. And as such, they're set up so that most of them, when you do this setup with the factory recommended setup, you're just going to worry about overhang and you're not going to worry about anything else. You're not going to have to deal with the Azimuth adjustment. If you square these two screws in these slots so that they're the same exact distance from the end, it'll be very close, and then you can kind of fine tune it by ear or with an oscilloscope, which we're going to do as you go on from there. So the first thing we want to do is, or next thing we want to do, is just mount the head shell. And we're just going to get it on there, and there isn't a whole lot of play. Locks in there pretty good. And then we're going to go ahead and set up the overhang, and we're going to talk about what overhang is here in a minute. Okay, now that the cartridge is roughly mounted on there, we're going to go through and just follow the instructions how to do the alignment for the lateral tracking. Lateral tracking, zenith alignment, there's different names, I think, and I'm not really good with terminology, remembering it, but bottom line is we're going to set the tracking of the cartridge so that it is parallel to the record grooves at two different points. We can get into that in another video. This particular turntable uses what's called the overhang method to align that part of the cartridge. And there's several different ways to align this. One is the overhang method. One is to use a clip-on gauge that's manufacturer specific, and I can show you one of these here in a second. So that would be these. This is the Technics, or Techniques, however you want to word it. This is the Pioneer gauge. The main difference is you can see the overhang is a little bit different on the two. And essentially what you do is you remove the head shell, you place this on there, and then you can see you set it in here, and then you set the stylus to be on this little line here, which is 15.5 millimeters, and that's going to mean that you're going to have 15.5 millimeters of overhang on the turntable. Or you use this one, which is the same thing. You clip this in here and you set right in that little notch. You see you have a tiny little arrow in there. You set the stylus to that, and that sets the overhang. And pretty much this is the coolest one, because if you set it right on this point, it aligns the cartridge both this way and this way. So this is set it and forget it. This one doesn't have the center line, so you will have to fiddle around with rotating it a little bit. And these do not come with the turntables usually. You have to purchase them separately. Whereas the Rotel turntable has this type of gauge, and it's actually part of the 45 RPM record adapter. On top of it, you have a little gauge. It's called the Stylus Overhang Gauge. And I keep using the word overhang. Overhang is the distance of the stylus tip, or the needle tip of the cartridge, how far it overhangs the very, very center of the center hub of the platter. So if I measure from this center to this outer mark, marked 15, that means that you have 15 millimeters of overhang. And this will all make sense in a minute when we do it. The other method to align a turntable cartridge like this is called the protractor method, where you use an actual protractor gauge. That's much more accurate, and it allows you to have different methods. But I don't want to get into that in this video. We're just going to do what the instructions say. And just to let you know, if you have one of these turntables, in the front of the book, it shows that the overhang is supposed to be 11 millimeters. and that is a typographical error. That's incorrect. If you go through and look at the actual instruction, it starts down here. So here's the beginning of it, and it goes to the next page, and it says to place the 45 RPM adapter with the overhang gauge readout on the center spindle, and then they want you to slide the cartridge on the head shell for 15 millimeter of overhang. All right, so that's what we're going to do. And what you're going to find out is this method that they give you will get the overhang to be correct, but it will not get the the angle in the cartridge correct. Technically, if you keep these two screws exactly the same distance away from each slot so that it's square in the cartridge, it should be properly aligned. So it shouldn't be a big problem. Now, why are we doing this? Well, real quick, without getting too much into it, pretend that these little ridges down here are the grooves of the record. Because this arm moves in an arc. In other words, if you drew a straight line from here to here, you would see that as this thing curves out, it'll make like an arcing pattern with respect to this center spindle. And there's only going to be two spots where this cartridge is going to be totally perpendicular to the record grooves. One towards the outer part of the record and one towards the inner part. And all these other parts, it's going to be just slightly out of alignment. And with a conical tip cartridge, it does make a little difference. But when you have an elliptical or a line, micro line or something, which is shaped kind of like this screwdriver tip, you want this to ride inside the grooves so that each corner touches the left and right side of the groove, so you get proper left and right channel separation. And imagine if it's turned this way, they're not going to track properly in that groove. So you don't want it to be turned like that. You want it to be straight, straight across. And that's what that adjustment is. So that's what we're trying to do. Okay, I hope I have the camera down far enough that we can see this. I have the cueing lever up so it holds the arm above the top there. We're going to move this over ever so carefully here, and if I look, I'm just almost at 15 millimeters. It's just a little bit, just a tiny little bit before it. And if we get a good light in here, let's get some better light. If I can get my hands out of the way here. So if we look just like this, we're just almost perfectly on it, actually. I think we're right there. Okay, so as you saw, that needle tip, or that stylus tip, was right just about perfectly on that 15, and that's with these screws all the way back against the end stops, and that's pretty much where you want it. So let's look one more time. I hope you can see this. Do you see the stylus? And if I'm not touching, but it's just right on that 15 spot. Okay, now we were able to do that on this particular turntable because the design of the turntable is such that the arm can extend all the way across the spindle. In some instances, the arm cannot extend over the spindle, and what's going to happen is you're not going to be able to use this method. You'll have to use the protractor method, and we'll get into that in another video if you guys are interested. If you folks want to see this, I can do another video. But it's aligned now, and we're going to do the next next thing we're going to do is we're going to do what's called the Azimuth Adjustment. So I'll show you how I do that here next. Okay, what is Azimuth Adjustment? Well, if I bring the arm in here and you look at this, what we're worried about is that the stylus, let me put this back, that the stylus is straight up and down. So you want it to be 90 degrees perpendicular to the record plane. So we don't want the stylus this way and we don't want it this way. We want it straight up and down. There's two different ways to check that. Number one is with a mirror, and it's going to be very difficult for me to do, for you to see this on from the camera angle. It's hard to get the camera at the correct angle. But what we'll do is we're going to put the tone arm down right here, and the anti-skating is kind of fighting us a little bit because I don't have any weight. I have the weight set to 0. But if I set this down here, and I'm going to have to move the camera after I do this, but you set it down there on a mirror, and you actually look at the reflection of the cartridge with respect to the cartridge itself. And the whole idea is the cartridge should not look angled with respect to the reflection on the mirror. They both should look parallel to one another, and you can get a very accurate setting doing it that way. That's one way to do it. The other way is to use a little gauge called an Azimuth gauge, and it's one of these, and it sits up like this, and you put your stylus down behind it, and then you look through this and you can see the azimuth on these lines, and you can align the cartridge. Now the thing is, with azimuth, you really don't have much adjustment on most cartridges or most head shells. Unless you can rotate the head shell in the arm, you really can't change the azimuth very much. And if you have to, what you can do is you can put shims underneath your cartridge on one side to shim it ever so slightly, but it's very finicky to do that. So if it's close, I'll pretty much leave well enough alone. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to adjust that. I hope I don't have to put any shims in here or worry about it. If it's very close, I'm going to leave it alone. Now, before you start any of your alignments, what you're going to want to do is check to make sure the turntable is perfectly level. You can buy these little level things that attach to your center spindle, or you can just use a small spirit level like this, and you have to check this direction and this direction, make sure it's perfect. If you're going to do a lot of work with turntables, it's good to invest in some of these tools. They're not really expensive if you get them like at eBay or something. But you can see we're pretty level there. At least, you know, when I look straight down on it, it's perfect. The camera's a little bit of an angle, but and you can see I had to just put a couple of cards, little paper cards, on this one corner just to get it perfect. My bench is pretty level, but of course, you know, you have all this stuff underneath this carpet and everything, so it's just off by a little bit. That's going to affect things, by the way, if it's not perfectly level. Okay, the next thing we're going to adjust is tracking force, and that is how much pressure the whole tone arm is going to apply onto the stylus into the record. And every cartridge and stylus combination will come with a recommended tracking force. It'll have a range of tracking force that it's okay to use in, and then it will have the recommended one. This particular one can go anywhere from 1.8 to 2.5 grams, but they recommend a tracking force of 2 grams, which is not too bad. Really high-end cartridges, some of them will track at about 1.5 grams. This one wants about 2 grams, so that's what we're going to set it to. So the first thing you want to do is we want to get our null point. So we want this thing to just kind of float. And you can see it's floating and it's not dropping down and it's not pulling up and hitting the end stop. And you do that by just adjusting this weight here until it gets to that null point. And then you're going to use this little ring gauge and set it to 0. Now this is going to allow you to get a rough estimate of where you need to be. Remember, we want about 2 grams. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the little lock on here so I don't make a mistake. And I'm going to rotate this to just before 2 grams. I'll make it a little bit under. Just about like that. And then you're going to need a tracking force gauge, such as this. And with these ridged platter mats, it's not easy to get this to sit there. So we're going to put this right here. And it's already calibrated, so it should be okay. And we're just going to put this here. And we're going to take this and we're going to move it over here. And we're going to set it down. Let me see you get it perfectly aligned. And I'm going to have to take this anti-skating gauge off here for now. There. Okay. And you can see it's way off. If you look, it's only about 1.7 grams, even though I have this thing set to about, well, it's set to about 1.9. So this will get you close, you know, this little gauge, but it's not perfect. So what I'm going to do is lift this up. I'm going to turn this just a little bit beyond the 2 gram thing, and then I'm going to set it back to 2 so that it reminds us that's where we're supposed to be. And then I'm going to set this back down right on the scale. And right now we're looking at about 1.84. So we have to go a little bit more yet. And there's 1.94 grams, and I'll call that good. That 0.05 grams is not going to make any difference, really. Okay. So our tracking force is set. And now we can check our anti-skating adjustment. Okay, well here's where the truth is going to be told. I've wiped off the stylus and I've put on a test record. And we're going to use a 315 hertz tracking tone. And they actually have 5 different levels, of output. The sound that you're going to hear I'm not connected to speakers, to an amplifier or anything. I'm coming right out of the cartridge from the phono outputs into a phono preamp and straight out of the preamp into the oscilloscope there. So there's no speakers, so what you're hearing is actually the vibration of the head shell from this really high output signal. Now what should happen is we should get 2 perfect 315 hertz right and left tone on the scope, sine waves. If we don't get that, then our tracking, our anti-skate is not correct. So it either could be anti-skate or it could be that the cartridge is not properly aligned. And we can check that by changing the anti-skate. So I'm going to zoom in here until we can see the scope. And I am going to go to the first test tone. And you're going to hear the sound because you can actually hear this. It's pretty amazing. So here we go, going down. And I'll put the microphone And you can see that's a pretty stable, that tiny little bit of warble is all the wow and flutter we're getting. And you can see the one side has a little bit more amplitude than the other, so that's telling me that our anti-skating is off. And see, now it's starting to distort as we go to the higher, hear that? The higher output. And the next one, it's going to get really bad. Watch this. And you can see, so that's, I believe that's anti-skating. So let's, okay, let's cue the needle back up, the stylus. And let's add our weight back on there, because as you can see, we do not have the anti-skating weight on there right now. So let's put that on and put it on the smallest amount and see what it does. Okay, the anti-skating weight is on, and it's on the least amount. We'll go back up to our scope, and I predict, but I don't know, maybe this will fix it, but I predict it's now going to make the other channel distort, because I think this is going to be too much. Okay, let's check it out. So far, so good. And see, just on the second amplitude, it's already distorting on to the other side. See how critical it is that you get anti-skating set properly? This is what it's doing to your music. Most people never see this, so take a good look on the scope, and it will get more and more pronounced as you play a higher and higher amplitude of tone. So you can see we definitely need to get the anti-skating more accurate. And it's skipping now. See that? And that's because the tracking force, and the difference between the tracking force and the anti-skate, it's just off, way off the charts. So we're going to have to adjust it. All right, after taking about half the material off of there, this is what we're left with. And it's pretty clear, and until we really get to the upper outputs, it's very clear. And again, this record is meant to push a cartridge beyond its limits, and you can see how clear that is now. So we've gotten rid of all the distortion, and now we can check a couple frequency sweeps, and this turntable should be ready to go. Okay, here's our 1 kilohertz on the left channel. And 1 kilohertz on the right channel. Should be coming up. There it is. Let me change the sync. There we go. And my camera mount is mounted to the same bench that this turntable is sitting on. So even if I touch the camera mount, you get that little tiny bit of rumble there, you can see, but that's very low frequency. And most tone sections of your turntable or of your amplifier, especially the older ones with the rumble filter, will filter that out. But you can see we have pretty good separation there, and so I think this is going to be a pretty good sounding turntable. So while it's not absolutely perfect, for this type of turntable, I would say that's working about as good as it can right now. Okay, here is an old, well-worn record that was 98 cents. And I don't know if this one's going to get tagged or not. I'll play a couple seconds of it, but we'll play some Stravinsky. And the stereo separation on this and everything is amazing, but of course without, going through all the trouble of connecting up a recorder to record it in stereo. You're just going to hear through the microphone. But it's pretty amazing. I did not put this in the ultrasonic cleaner. It just got, you know, brushed and most of the dust removed. But we'll do a needle drop here. Again, I don't know how much of this is going to get, if this is going to get tagged or not, but it sounds really good for an old record and so forth. It sounds really good. Anyway, that is it for right now. If you're interested in seeing more turntable videos, let me know. If not, I have a couple of receivers that need to go on a bench, and we'll continue our work with that. Anyway, until next time, I wish you all peace, joy, happiness, and good health in your lives. And we'll see you again real soon. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.